Okay, we're back with the chapter 15, lecture 7, and this is picking up again with vaccines. So you should have watched the Why Vaccines Work video. So the last question here, why can't everyone get vaccinated? So, one of the reasons why some people can't get vaccinated is because of how vaccines are actually made. So, some people are allergic to eggs, so that makes it difficult for them, actually impossible for them to be able to be vaccinated. Because if you have an egg allergy, these actually are deadly for you. If you think about allergies, if you would be injecting something that you are allergic to straight into your body, that can create an anaphylactic reaction. So, people who have egg allergies cannot get vaccines who are egg based, and a lot of our vaccines are still egg based. And then there are other individuals who cannot get vaccinated because of health reasons. If you're immunocompromised, for some reason, whether it's a health condition, if you have a organ transplant, so you're on medication to suppress your immune system, these are things that you would not be getting a vaccine because the vaccine could actually trigger your immune system or allow for another condition to invade your system. So there are individuals who cannot be vaccinated, and that's why we want to get those vaccination rates as high as we can for a majority of the population. And you'll actually do an activity a little later on to show how that works. So viruses are responsible for a lot of health problems. There aren't really a lot of viruses that are helpful. We do use some in bioengineering, but pretty much these are known as pathogens. So the most well-known one of the viruses is the flu. And we are currently in a pandemic that is caused not by a flu virus, but by a coronavirus, as you may have heard. The influenza pandemic was the last large one. You can see here about 100 years ago. And it did kill millions of people. And the interesting thing, if you want to think of it this way, was the influenza pandemic of 1918, 1919 actually killed perfectly healthy individuals. If you look into this picture, if you look closely, these are individuals in their middle age, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And they were perfectly healthy. Now, you may have heard the 1918, 1919 flu called the Spanish flu. You can see mine has a little hat on it. The interesting thing with that is it actually didn't originate in Spain. We're pretty sure it actually originated here in the United States in Kansas. And the funny thing is in Spain it was called the French flu. So the name just kind of got stuck to it. But this is one of, if you've heard of H1N1, this virus was one of the H1N1 viruses. And I'll talk to you a little bit later on what H1N1 means. So, the thing is the other question that most people have about vaccines, especially with the flu vaccine, is why do we need a new flu vaccine every year? And it is related to why flu viruses change quickly. Flu viruses belong to one of the two virus groups. So I mentioned when I was talking about the structure that viruses either have DNA or RNA. And so let's take a look at some of the viruses. So we've got DNA viruses. So DNA viruses, and I've got some of these guys here in my collection. So DNA viruses include things like HPV. So HPV, this one causes, there are different strains of this one. Some of them create just regular warts. You may actually have this if you've ever had warts. You still actually have this strain in your body. This one also causes cervical cancer. So we actually have a vaccine for this one now. Let's see, who else do we have? Herpes. I have herpes. Herpes looks kind of, well, when they make it into a stuffed animal, looks kind of like a fried egg. This is herpes. And there's different versions of herpes as well. Chickenpox. They actually made chickenpox to look kind of like a chicken. Chickenpox is vaguely related to herpes, so that's why it has that same sort of egg type shape. Sorry. Smallpox, that was mentioned in the vaccine video. Thankfully, smallpox is no longer in the population. It's one that we actually have eradicated. And hepatitis B. So these are all viruses that are DNA viruses. You may actually recognize these. We actually have vaccines for almost all of them. And DNA viruses are stable viruses. These don't mutate very much at all. In fact, most of them are pretty stable viruses. On the other hand, RNA viruses, these guys tend to mutate. So I showed you the 1918 flu. Here's my little mini flu. This is another influenza A. You may have heard of influenza A, influenza B. Those are the two major strains, but then there are different strains inside of these guys. Measles, I don't have measles or rabies, but those are RNA viruses. Ebola, HIV. Most of my guys are missing right now. And yellow fever. So these are all RNA viruses. And right now, the only ones of these that we have vaccines for are the influenza and measles viruses. We do have a rabies, but that one is really after you've been exposed, we can give you that one. It's not one that for humans really gives huge long-term effectiveness. They did find one and I believe have it tested for Ebola. But measles, that one we've got, and it's a long-term one. We've been using it for a long time, but that's because measles, even the RNA changes, the outer coating doesn't. But influenza mutates a lot because of that RNA when it gets transferred from organism to organism. So you may have heard that we had an outbreak recently, or not that recently, but previously in 2002, 2003, called SARS. And this one, if you've seen it reported in the news recently, is actually being listed as SARS-2 because the coronavirus that we have now is very similar to the SARS outbreak in 2002, 2003 as far as its structure. And the thing is that these viruses can actually infect a wide range of organisms. So you saw some of them in that list. A lot of them, are from us. So this is mononucleosis. Common cold actually looks a lot like mono. So it's got the same sort of shape. That's the thing, is that a lot of these viruses are in shape classes. So that's why COVID-19 actually is a coronavirus. It's actually a group of viruses that all have that same sort of shape, but have different genetic makeups. Then the very beginning picture for this section was of this guy. Looks a little like an alien spaceship. This actually is the kind that infects bacteria. And so most of the ones that infect bacteria look like these guys. They look kind of like little alien structures. So pretty much every organism on the planet that we've found has at least one or more viruses that infect them. Plants have multiple viruses, insects have multiple viruses, so these are infecting everything that we have here on the planet today. So what's the deal with influenza? Why is it such a problem? So it mutates its RNA, so it mutates its genetic information. The other thing is that influenza is one of the viruses that has that plasma membrane. And I told you I'd come back to these glycoproteins. So influenza, that H1N1, what those letters and numbers mean, it's talking about these glycoproteins. You can think of these like keys. So these, it's showing you, it's pointing to the blue ones here. These blue ones on this guy are going to bind the influenza to the host cell and allow the virus inside to deposit its RNA. So these are the keys to get in. So that would be the H part. The yellow ones of these glycoproteins that you see down here, these are the ones that allow the virus back out. So these influenza viruses, to be effective, need a key to get into a cell and a need a key to get out of a cell. That's how they get to the point where they infect humans. So they have to get out to be able to infect another human. And so the N is the second one. And you can see that a virus can have these multiple strains with different sets of glycoproteins. So you can have multiple options. And this is the problem with figuring out a flu vaccine, because you can have an influenza A, but you can have this one or this one or this one. And unfortunately, it is not really possible to stuff all of the different strains into one vaccine. So we have to take our best shot at which ones we think are going to be in the population in the next year. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this, because this is actually related to what's been happening now. So what role does a pig play in transmission of a virus from a bird to a human? Well, so here's what happens. So we've got a human with a human virus. We've got birds with bird viruses. The thing is that it's not going to generally happen that a bird virus is going to go and infect a human. They don't work very well to do that. We've had bird viruses infect humans, but it requires a huge amount of contact between birds and humans, and the ones that do make that jump then don't go on to infect other humans. That one human will get infected and then it stops there. Here, what we have happen is that this virus can infect a pig from both the bird and from the human. And what happens is when they infect that pig cell, as you can see here, the two get mixed together, because that RNA is very prone, it's very often going to get errors put into it. And so you can actually get the two viruses mixed together. So you can end up in a pig basically getting a mixed up virus, which is part bird, part human. And then that virus can get passed from the pig onto the human. And so, like I said, right now, bird flu, to go from bird to human, requires lots of close contact with infected birds or eating birds that died of the virus. What we're looking at is this: a pig plus a bird flu plus a human virus might get us a new form of virus that carries the genes that makes it lethal to us and allows it to go from host to host. So how is that related to what's going on today? Well, something similar has happened. The thing is that we just don't, it's not a bird, it was most likely a bat, and it wasn't probably a pig, but another animal. Last I heard, the possibility was what's called a pangolin, but it's the same idea. So if the virus came from a bat instead of a bird, it got into another animal that could get infected with human viruses, they mixed together, and now we have what we have today, because the same thing happens with coronaviruses that happen with flu viruses. And so now we've got a virus instead of a flu, instead of influenza, we have a coronavirus that can do the same thing, that has that ability to jump from one organism to another. All right, I'm going to have to stop here, and I will come back and just briefly talk about HIV and why it shows another problem about creating vaccines and treatments for viruses.